Mick Danzig.
And I'm Hannah Hampton.
And this is not an HR podcast.
Well, hello and welcome to This Is Not an HR Podcast, Halloween Spooktacular. This is the only HR podcast whose hosts have a higher body count than Jason Voorhees and the Titanic combined. Hannah Hampton, the Nancy Thompson to my Freddy Krueger. How the hell are you today?
I'm great. It's spooky season, and I love that.
Spooky season. I put more prep into that intro than I do every episode. But
amazing.
It's because you and I love this time of year.
We do.
It's almost Halloween.
Yay!
I know we repeat ourselves a lot because we only do this episode once a year, but obviously we both love Halloween. But at some point, it became more about the frights versus the sugar rush for both of us at a pretty young age, right?
Unfortunately, yeah. I mean, the candy was always great, but it was more about the scares and the frights and all of the fun stuff that comes with Halloween.
What I think scariest about this season is the upcoming election, and that's as much as we talk about politics. Instead, Hannah Hampton, I want to talk about our origin stories.
Yeah, how we became the villains that we are today. Our villain origin story. I guess I'm really speaking for myself. You can be the hero.
No, I would rather be the bad guy. So seriously, let's talk origin stories. Kind of tell me a little bit about when you got into the spooky side of Halloween more so than your friends. I don't want the Princess Leia costume. I want to be Pinhead from Hellraiser.
I mean, have I dressed like Princess Leia? Of course I have. Just throwing that one out there.
Mr. Hampton is a lucky guy.
Well, so I have to say, I have an older brother. I have two brothers. I don't have a sister. And then being a child of the 80s, I mean, that's just built into my DNA. I can't even tell you how old I was the first time I saw a horror movie. I probably shouldn't admit this in public, but I remember my dad taking me to see Aliens at the movie theater, and I was far too young for it, but I still enjoyed the heck out of it. You know, having brothers and having one television, I was like forced to watch what they watched. So it was horror movies, Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, and wrestling. And then, of course, what really hooked me were the great horror anthology series of the 1980s. Tales from the Dark Side, The Hitchhiker, the Twilight Zone reboot, amazing stories. I don't know if that's necessarily horror, but there were horror scary aspects to it.
Absolutely.
And of course, like Alfred Hitchcock's Presents, it was another one that was rebooted in the 80s. I feel like the 80s were a beautiful time for horror fans. Great movies, but also some great anthology series. So that's where mine started, was these great shows. Certainly it was easy to access those, and then but Tales from the Dark Side was a syndication. So to me, those were almost like surprises. Some days I'd turn on the television and there would be the do 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 do. I would always be excited when I get to watch those.
Now, you love anthology, period.
Oh, yes.
And I know you have a tradition. I believe it's New Year's Day where you watch all of the Twilight Zones. Is that right?
It's New Year's Eve. Well, so it's a New Year's Eve tradition on Sci-Fi, and they've been doing that since 1995. But every year, make all of my favorite foods, and I watch the Twilight Zone marathon on Sci-Fi. I own all of the episodes on DVD, and of course, they're streaming. But to me, there's something just beautiful about this collective. We're all watching the same episodes at the same time type of a thing. But the Twilight Zone the original Twilight Zone is my favorite TV show of all time. So certainly the anthology has a strong hold on my heart.
Now, was Twilight Zone around the same time before or after you discovered the horror anthologies?
Great question. It was definitely the same time. So I'm going to tell you kind of a funny story about how I got hooked on the Twilight Zone. So as I was saying, I was raised with brothers, and I watched what they watched. And my older brother was a big fan of the anthology series. He loved Amazing Stories. He loved Tales from the Dark Side. And then we'd watch the Twilight Zone reboot, which I was a kid when that was a reboot, and I didn't know anything about the original series. You know, when I'd see the Twilight Zone in TV Guide, because this obviously is before streaming, before even the TV Guide channel, I would try to remember to watch it. And I was lucky. Eventually, my parents gave me my own television in my room. It was a 3-inch black and white portable television that only got antenna channels. So, I mean, was it great? To me, it was the best thing in the world, but everything was in black and white. So I would just watch The Twilight Zone, whether it was the 80s reboot or the original, on my little black and white TV. And I just assumed everything was color. And then I remember the first time I watched the Twilight Zone original on like the regular TV, and I'm like, what is wrong with this? Why is it still in black and white? And that's kind of what I realized. I mean, of course I knew that there was definitely differences in the production quality, but I kind of put my finger on it. I'm like, oh my goodness, this really is in black and white. How cool is that? I certainly will say that the anthology was the reason that I'm so into the Twilight Zone. And then now as an adult, I see, what the true meanings of a lot of the episodes and what Rod Serling, the creator and writer of most of the episodes, was trying to get us to see. And I appreciate all of that now. But let's get real. I still very much get a kick out of any anthology, good or bad.
My introduction to the Twilight Zone was off of UHF television.
Not the Weird Al movie, but the actual channel.
I believe at some point I actually admitted to seeing that movie.
I love that movie.
In the theater. It would have been better on a late night. But I discovered Twilight Zone from a local UHF channel. And as Hannah was alluding to, that was pre-cable. And you had the regular network television. Those 3 channels were on it. Back then it was a dial. And then you had to actually go to a giant U on the dial, and it had its own sub-tuning dial. It was kind of like Access TV, but channel you could get the best was a PBS. PBS was on UHF back then. And then there was one local television, kind of like the Me TV, the CW, and that type of programming of the day, the equivalent. After school, they would have like Underdog and things like that. The Rockford Files later on.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? Though it was all that stuff.
Because that was played at my house all the time. Jeez, I remember that. It's just like all coming back to me now.
So, and I didn't even intend this transition, but the Rockford Files was one of my grandmother's favorite shows. I'd go stay with her on a Friday night. She would let me stay up late and watch the local horror film host, Sammy Terry. I didn't know at the time that there were all these regional local television hosts, horror schlocky hosts like this. And Sammy Terry was based out of Indianapolis. His co-host was a visibly hung from the ceiling rubber spider named George that he would talk to. And of course, George didn't talk back. And he would introduce these 50s and 60s drive-in horror shows. My first movie that I remember, was the original version of The Blob.
Ooh.
And in hindsight, it's never one of my favorite horror films, but to this day, it's the one I remember, the most vividly. As you mentioned your father taking you to see Aliens, my parents later told me they took me to a 3-screen drive-in to see like something like the equivalent of the Apple Dumpling Gang. I don't know exactly what it was. They were watching it, and I was in the back seat, and they turned and realized I had been facing the screen behind us, and of course we don't have the audio for it, watching the original Exorcist.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. I love that.
So I had some Disney audio piping through the cheap tinny speaker of the old drive-in theater.
So much about you now. We've known each other for over a decade, and it makes a lot of sense. I, to this
day, do not recall it at all. I wish I did, and I had some, and that's when my parents scarred me in some bullshit I could blame them for, but I don't remember it. This is something my parents swear by.
And that movie is terrifying. I list that, like, of course we all have our favorite movies, and to me that's definitely a top 5 favorite horror movie. But I maybe it was because I was raised Catholic, but it still scares the fucking shit out of me.
I've only watched it as an adult once, and I agree. I don't like possession type movies.
Oh,
like any of the new ones. I haven't watched any of those. My only awareness of their stories, other than the previews, is Dan Cummins, the comedian, has a great horror podcast because he always tells ghost stories that are supposedly true to his wife on this podcast.
I love a good ghost story.
A lot of those are based on quote unquote true stories.
Right. Yeah, it's that couple who,
Yes.
yeah. And I'm blanking on their names. That whole series about the real life couple that they explored haunted things, I guess is a good way to put it.
Paranormal Activity.
Paranormal Activity. Yep. Well, yeah.
And here we are talking our horror episode, and we're like, that's
like,
scary shit. But
scary stuff. Yeah.
I was turned off on some of it early because of the hoaxsters, and then the real stuff kind of freaks me out a little bit.
The Conjuring. The Conjuring is what we're talking about.
Yes, and I'm just afraid of opening that door a little bit. But I will mention there is one of my recommendations for this year does have a little bit of that. So when I was talking about Cemetery,
and I just got that's Cemetery, and we've been talking about Cemetery for a long time, and I just got it.
I like it. I didn't realize that your origin was the anthologies as much because you were the one that kind of turned me on to Svengoolie.
Yeah, but I lived in Chicago for a very long time. I don't live there anymore. Svengoolie is a classic character of Chicago, and as of probably the past 10, 15 years his shows become national. But it was a local Chicago horror show where he would be the host, and of course, he would just have the best / corniest comedy along with the show, along with the movies, which just obviously made it. That was our local Chicago horror host. And I don't want to say I grew up with Svengoolie, but Svengoolie was the horror host that I spent the most time with.
Up to Svengoolie, the most popular or famous local host was Elvira.
Oh, of course.
Played by Cassandra Peterson. She had the movie Macabre from 81 to 86. There's been some reboots that she's done. She's kind of seeing a resurgence. But let's talk about some of the others just so so hopefully some of our listeners will recognize some of these other local hosts. Chilly Billy Cardile was Pittsburgh's version. He was considered to be part of the first wave of horror hosts. Ghoulardi from Cleveland. He started, get this, 1963 to 66. So I think he is definitely one of the OG schlock hosts. We have Sir Graves Ghostly from Detroit. The Vegas Vampire, which I have got to get on YouTube and find the Vegas Vampire. Bob Wilkins from San Francisco. I remember he was a horror host. He had a V-neck sweater and puffed a cigar. We had Larry Vincent from Los Angeles. Janet J, who was also kind of like a Elvira type where she did the fishnet stockings and the jet black hair. And then the last one I found was Grim Gory, a local host who wore a rubber gorilla mask, pompadour, sunglasses, and a denim vest covered in pins and spikes. I would definitely love to hear from our listeners. Shoot us some emails regarding your experience with these or any other local schlock movie host that we didn't mention.
And there's definitely many. Count Gore de Vol, it was one from DC that I remember seeing in my search. Klaus Morgus the Magnificent. I mean, I feel like for every kind of area, there's probably a horror host because, let's get real. It's a really great genre. And who would not just have the most fun getting to dress up and talk about horror movies? Talk about a dream job. I know this is not another HR podcast, but talking about a dream job like that has got to be fabulous.
So something else that I want to share, you and I got a little salty with each other before we hit record today. But, I got mad because you kind of burst my bubble on something I brought up. But the point you made, I don't know, in such a mean and vicious way, we'll say. But the point you made, and you and I have talked about this personally before, is just the amount of just streaming material out there is just too much. And we've talked about how it's difficult to find common shows with coworkers because there's just too much content out there. And that actually part of the origin of the sister podcast Bubbler was to create water cooler talk because you no longer have that everyone watched Cosby on Thursday night and they're going to talk about it on Friday morning, or
Right.
LA Law, or there are no
ER.
There are no water cooler show. No one in your office is watching the same shit as you 99%
It's
of the
so
time.
true, and it's so frustrating, and I almost when I'm talking to my nephew who's 13, it's almost like, "When I was your age, we all watched the same shows and had to sit through the commercials," and I feel like such an old lady having that conversation, but, I think about Amazing Stories was an anthology series on NBC I mentioned, but it was a big deal, because it was Steven Spielberg, it was his show. It was really cool because the opening credits had CGI, which was, for that time period, revolutionary. Everybody talked about that at school or at work, but nowadays, it is so rare that you go to work and it's like, "Yeah, everybody watched the American Horror Story last night," and it's just sad because it's truly no longer that water cooler aspect that you have to seek out those people.
So let's try to create a little bit of a common ground and let's talk some of our favorite anthologies, specific episodes, or
Mm.
with me, mine's going to be a little more movie based. Let's go back and forth. Give me your first recommendation, what you think someone should watch between now and November 1st of this year. What's your first
Oh my
Halloween
gosh.
go to?
Well, I have to say, for me, this is tough because I have been watching a lot of anthologies, specifically Tales from the Dark Side, which that was the George Romero produced show. And I mean, I just adore him. What I like about Tales from the Dark Side is some of them are scary, but there are a lot of the horror comedy in there. There's this one called Anniversary Dinner that I recommend. It's a nice kind of slow burn story. You can usually predict what's going to happen, but I'd say that's a stronger one. My second recommendation from Tales from the Dark Side is called A Case of the Stubborns, and it's got a young Christian Slater in it. And it's
Yes.
it's a more of a comedy one. Brent Spinner, I think is his name. Data from TSG from Next Generation. I know I said that wrong, but it's a comedy one. And anytime I get a chance to watch it, I watch it because I just get the biggest kick out of it. So those are two. I'm like, those are great places to start. And let's get real. The scariest part of Tales from the Dark Side is always the theme music. I would usually run from the room, let the music play, and then have my brother yell at me when it was over because between the eerie music and then that guy's voice, like, "But, there is," him giving the whole little spiel at the beginning of each episode always scared the crap out of me. So I'd hide from that one. Now, on the flip side, Tales from the Crypt, I like to sit through that those opening credits because I loved the haunted house, and then you'd get to the crypt keeper and he'd be like, with this little laugh, and
Yes.
I loved that one.
Yeah, a huge fan of both shows, and I did watch them when they were brand new and will still
Yes.
revisit them. My first movie pick
Mm.
is one that I think you and I agreed on, and if I'm wrong, I'm gonna apologize in advance.
Ooh.
It was released at the beginning of this year. It was one that I had on my list, and it took me forever to get to. I just watched it a couple months ago. I watched it just a couple weeks later with my dad
Yeah, I
in
know which one you're gonna say. Yep.
Late Night with the Devil.
Yes, I recommend that one. I loved that. And again, I have been appreciating kind of the slow burn. And that is one that I want to rewatch because I feel like there's lots of little Easter eggs in there, some more hidden than others. There was a lot. I feel like that was such a well thought out movie. And the performance of the lead David, again, I don't know how to say his last name or I can't remember it, but he was just perfection. I think that was great casting. So I agree with that one. Now, if I can bring up one thing, and I know that you are a Family Guy person,
Yes.
but at the start of the movie, there were so many production companies involved, and Family Guy has made fun of that. And it's really bad when a horror movie starts out and I'm laughing out loud because I'm like, how many more production companies can put their little like bumper on here? And I feel like there were so many of them, so feel free to laugh at that. But it's a good way, I guess, to laugh before the horror.
It's funny that you mentioned that because it really stood out in this film to me as well at the beginning, and all I could think of is Family Guy, and the thing is each intro because they put so much production
Yes.
into their logos that it's like a little mini clip, and And Peter's watching a film, and each little production company's mini clip, he goes, "Oh, is this the movie now? Oh, there it is. They're in a lighthouse, and there's what? There's something behind the lighthouse." And it'll be like Lighthouse Productions present. And it keeps happening. And oh my
Yes,
God, did I notice that in this
me
movie?
too.
And it is very big in a lot of movies right now because of financing and so many going straight
For
to streaming and
sure.
everything else. But my God, in horror films, you can easily have 7 to 9 or more little production company clips before the fucking opening title. And
It's
you're
kind
just
of
like,
hilarious.
it is funny, but it's also like, guys, go with the logo, man. Whoever put the most money in gets a clip. Everyone else all gets their logo on the screen at once. It's like looking at a race car driver or sponsors that are all
All
over
over
them.
the cars or their
Oh my.
outfits. Oh,
Yeah,
for
you're a
sure.
Formula One girl. I mean,
I love
the main
F1. It
sponsor
is.
gets the steering wheel or the dash, and then everyone else is all over the car. But shit.
I
But
laughed my ass off. I could not. I'm sorry. It was just made me laugh. And of course, I think I texted a friend of mine. I'm like, you have to watch it just for that. So,
what's funny is I noticed it even more the second time because I don't know about you, but whenever I share a film with my family, I'm like so like hyper aware of all the stupid parts or things like that.
aw.
So I'm sitting next to my dad, and this movie opens with 25 production credit, and I'm just like, "Oh my God, my dad hates it already. Why am I making him watch this?" First horror film I went to the theater with my dad, and it was my pick was the Quentin Tarantino film with George Clooney From Dusk Till Dawn.
Oh, yeah.
Great movie. But when you're like 16 and you're watching it with your father in his 40, it was a bit much. And he likes to bust my chops about that. And his favorite thing after I make him watch a movie is, do I get those 2 hours of my life back?
Uh-uh.
And I just the whole film I'm watching the opening and I'm waiting for him to turn and say that just over the opening credits. Give me another anthology or film that you recommend for 2024.
Oh, for 2024. I mean, this is a tough one because I feel like there's so much out there. But I'm going to go with a more recent one. And I alluded to its, I guess, sister show. But American Horror Stories is the same people who do American Horror Story, but they released an anthology series a couple of years ago. They released episodes just recently in the past, I want to say week. And I have just started watching those, but the first episode is with Michael Imperioli. He was Christopher from The Sopranos.
He was
Anyway,
also in Law and Order for a very short stint.
oh, that's right. That's right. The White Lotus is something that he was in the most recent series where they were in Italy. But anyway, so he leads up the first episode. To me, it was extremely predictable, but that is okay. But it explored kind of those liminal spaces, which I feel like if you're ever on the internet, there's lots of sites that talk about that and how spooky it is. Like if you're in an empty storefront and it's just kind of creepy, just long, creepy hallways. So it explores that a little bit. My next pick is going to be American Horror Stories. And of course, there was a couple of gems from the earlier seasons. And like any anthology series, there's going to be ones that are awesome and then ones that kind of stink. That's the fun of the anthology.
So the difference with this is each episode's a standalone versus
Correct. Yeah, there is each of the standalone.
oh,
Now there are a couple that are linked to each other in an earlier season, and there was one where they linked to Murder House, which was the first season of American Horror Story, and it was kind of fun how they did that. Yes, they're each standalone episodes. The newest one that I watched, it's just its own little story. It's a complete anthology series.
I was slightly aware of it. I think I saw it advertised on Hulu last year. It was the first time I noticed it, but I didn't really pursue it or look into it. I have not watched any season of American Horror Story.
Really?
I know. I don't know why, and it is
Oh, I
something I'd
love
like to
it.
look into this week.
Oh, I
But
love it. Mm-hmm.
Mrs. Danzig doesn't like horror, so I've got to pick and choose what I'm going to stay up late and watch. I'm going to give this one a shot right away. So thank
Mm-hmm.
you for that. My last two suggestions or picks, whatever you want to call them, are actually trilogies. All three movies are currently available for streaming. I'm going to call this Mick's quote unquote family friendly pick because it's not that family friendly. Still, I wouldn't watch it with anyone under the age of 13, 14.
sure.
But it's something that I have wanted to check out, and I finally did this year. I have never read any of R.L. Stein's Goosebumps books or anything like that.
I haven't either. I think we're a little too old for it.
When I was young, I jumped into Stephen King way too early. So that's probably a reason.
That's why Gen X that's why we're fucked up, is because of Stephen King, and we love you, Stephen King.
So I never got into the R.L. Steins. I was never into horror light. I always thought that R.L. Stein's books were kind of kid books. I didn't realize that some of his stuff was very scary. As a matter of fact, it was probably just a couple years ago that I found out that R.L. Stein wasn't a chick. I always thought it was a female author.
Really?
I swear. That's how unaware I am of R.L. Stein. But on Netflix, they have a trilogy from the Fear Street books.
Mm-hmm.
What makes this work so well, each movie is set in a certain time period. So the first one's in the 90s, early 90s, perfect time for horror. The second one, which is a camp-based movie, is in 1978. So we're talking prime, Friday the 13th, all that stuff. And then the final one goes back into the Salem witch era, takes place in 1666.
Oh, cool.
And there is some gore. So, I mean, that's why I don't recommend it for 12 or younger. There is just enough gore, but I highly recommend it, especially if you're not a fan of torture porn, like we've talked about in the past, which Eli Roth with the Hostel movies and now the Terrifier trilogy. If that is not your bag of tricks, I highly recommend Fear Street because I think it provides just enough of all the key ingredients to a good horror film.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm going to give a more recent, and I say recent because I talked about 80s anthologies. This anthology series is about probably almost nearing 20 years old. It was on Showtime, and it was called Masters of Horror. Created by Mick Garris, they brought in a bunch of just horror movie icons to direct episodes. Tobe Hooper's one of them, Dario Argento, Mick Garris, Joe Dante, John Landis, John Carpenter, Takashi Miike, like anybody who is anyone, they brought into this series. I really, really enjoyed this series. And again, like I said, with any anthology, some are good, some are not so good. But the very first episode that kicked it off was called Incident on and Off a Mountain Road. You know, I don't want to give away too much. It has a woman who is this like running from a serial killer, and she is a badass chick. I love a good story with a strong female lead. There's a really great twist in it. And it's just one of those, like, the first time I watched it, and it was just beautifully shot too. So I enjoyed it start to finish. And it was a very strong episode to kick off that anthology series. So that Incident on and Off a Mountain Road from the Masters of Horror is one to check out. And then if I can just get one more in there before your final thoughts, there's another episode, and I believe it was called The Family or something. Yeah, it's just called Family. And it's about a couple who moves into a home next door, and they have this neighbor who ends up being this psychotic serial killer. So I guess another one with a serial killer. Certainly, it's got a really great twist at the end as well. And I guess somebody who loves the Twilight Zone loves a good twist ending. Those are two. I'd say if you want to check out the series, want to start with a couple of two strong episodes, I certainly say check that one out.
Excellent. And that's another one that I've heard of it, never watched it. I'm going to give that a shot.
Oh, it's so good. It's got all these great directors. I mean, come on.
All right. Well, you probably know what I'm going to recommend as far as my must-see trilogy. I think I texted you late one night, and I had just seen the movie X. And I'm like, oh my God, Hannah, you got to check this out. I just watched. Have you ever seen this? And of course, I was assuming you had seen it, and you were like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
And I still haven't seen it. I'm sorry.
No, the film did better than expected. And so X was the first one. Funny is, I think some of the newer horror films that are better are taking place in certain time periods. And this one starts in 1979 in a desolate Texas farm where these guys are going to shoot a porn because the porn industry is blown up thanks to the popularity of Deep Throat, which was actually played in major theaters. And so these kids are off making a porn in the rural Texas, and shit goes sideways. but it had a good aesthetic to it. It really did at times remind me of Texas Chainsaw Massacre as far as letting the setting be kind of spooky, but then things are more character driven. I highly recommend it. I got excited about it. Then they ended up making a second film, which is interesting choice. They went to a prequel that takes
Hmm.
place in 1918 called
Interesting.
Pearl. But what really works with Pearl is this is a great example of how the score and soundtrack really helps take you back, get your buy-in. It has a great backstory, and then you understand what the link is to X. And some people cite that as the best of the trilogy. But the last film that wraps it all up, of course, it takes place in the 80s, 1985 in LA during the time of the real life serial killer, the Night Stalker, who kind of sets the tone as well. So once again, the period of the film adds to the piece itself. Maxine is a
Hmm.
porn star breaking into the movies, and she gets an opportunity through a horror film. Her past may or may come back to haunt her. Her friends are being murdered, and that's as much as I'll say about it. The third piece is it not a die-hard horror film, that it actually has little action and suspense.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting choice. I will say it doesn't start out the strongest. There are some weird pieces and some definite weird choices by the director. It's almost like it's this piecemeal movie at the beginning, but it all finds common ground and closes strong. So I definitely say if you don't have a lot of time to really watch a bunch of horror films and television shows, Hannah has given a great selection for you to choose from of anthologies. So those aren't going to take up as much time. Some of them are only 30 minutes long. As long as you watch Late Night with the Devil as well, do an anthology and do Late Night with the Devil. And I think you'll have a pretty spooktacular Halloween.
I love that.
Outstanding. Well, Hannah, it's always a ghoulishly delight catching up with you. This is Mick Danzig reminding our listeners to make sure to scare the hell out of those free-loading, sugar-seeking zombies and save a few fun-sized Butterfingers for us this Halloween.
Happy Halloween.